while Neil Young is running around, singing, "Keep on rocking for Moderna," the rest of us have got to be asking ourselves, where is all of this going? I mean, there is this huge divide that is now taking place, and we see it, we feel it. Hopefully some of us are starting to feel that mending a little bit because those that were vaccinated, maybe after the second shot or certainly when the third shot came along and promises of a fourth shot, have people, starting to feel delusioned, starting to drop away from their belief in the government system. But is that a good thing? What happens if, we lose faith as a whole in our government institutions, in our health departments? I mean, in some ways that seems like it could be Armageddon, like a gnashing of teeth as it's described in the Bible. Is it going to get biblical? Well, my next guest is someone who I am so excited to talk to because over the years, he has had an almost magical, uncanny ability to predict things in the future. It started with his ability to predict things in the stock market, and then ultimately a couple of opportunities where he predicted the fall of nations. And then he got himself in a lot of trouble. I'm talking about Martin Armstrong, and a few years ago there was a documentary about him called The Forecaster. Here's just a taste of what that was all about.
It starts in August of 1999. Yeltsin's going to run for election in 2000. They get Yeltsin to take $7 billion from the IMF loans. Now they threaten Yeltsin. You're not going to run for election in 2000. Otherwise, all this is going to come out that you stole $7 billion from the IMF.
Сегодня я в последний раз обращаюсь к вам как президент России.
This is how Putin gets in.
The reason we have this crisis is because since World War II, they basically borrow year after year.
He didn't want to go to college. His father said, "You got to do something." So he enrolled him in RCA computer store.
I thought I could create a system that stores the knowledge of century to predict the future.
The entire trading community would scramble to see his signals as soon as they were released.
He predicted the top in the Nikkei index.
The computer says your country is just going to completely fall apart in 8 days.
Obviously, that prediction was correct.
They realized that the model could forecast the rise or fall of a nation.
I wanted that source code, which is text.
We went to source code. I said, not getting it. Sorry.
The government came in, they shut down everything, seized all the accounts.
I had friends, they said, we'll put up the money in cash tonight.
He's held with the worst of the worst.
He wasn't backing down, and didn't seem like they were either.
And he said to his mom, they want what I've spent my entire life developing, and I'm not giving it to them.
2014, the war cycle starts turning up again. You have the natives against the immigrants that are coming in.
2016, a third party began to rise.
You get separatist movements. As the money begins to flow out of the banks, then you're going to see the rates start to take off. That is also the possibility of Europe breaking up. With rates that's so low, just a small uptick in rates, you're creating these interest expenditures are just going to take off like a rocket ship. When Europe is getting worse and worse, and the capital comes here. It then forces the dollar up. Assets begin to rise. If they're going to fear a collapse in Europe, it's going to move in different places. This is how it does.
His name is Martin Armstrong. The documentary, The Forecaster, came out back, I believe it was in 2015. But it is my pleasure and honor to be joined right now by Martin Armstrong. So first of all, thank you for coming in to
Thank you for inviting me.
To talk to us. So just quickly, to sort of go through your history. You're a pretty smart kid. You're really into trading coins and things. Start by asking your mom to, get your change, and you started collecting that. But at the moment you've got to go to university, you're not keen on the idea, so your dad says you have to do something. And so what ends up being the decision there?
Well, I mean, I started, but my father was a lawyer, so he was trying to push me, into law.
Okay.
I really didn't particularly care for that, and so it It was my father that pushed me into computers. And,
Okay.
But back then in the 60s, I mean, a computer was as large as this entire, stage.
Right.
And they were still using, vacuum tubes then.
Okay.
And integrated circuits had just been developed. And so when I went there, I mean, it was basically in those days, you had to do the whole engineering side, electrical and computing side, so you had to do both.
So you had to be able to build a computer
From scratch,
From
how
scratch.
how to design it, everything, and which was very good. But then what happened was that RCA made a serious mistake. They thought the computer was more like the radio, that we end up big wooden units, and it's going to come down to a crystal set that kid's going to buy in a 5 and dime.
Okay.
So they thought they were selling the peak, but RCA was actually the biggest computer company at the time.
Wow. Okay.
Because they came out of World War II with all the government contracts, etc. So they sold the computer division to IBM and UNIVAC.
Wow.
And they kept the servicing. So they wanted, those of us that were there, I was offered Thule, Greenland, Guam, or Vietnam.
Okay.
And the married guys were getting London, Paris, stuff like that. And I said, first it was like, you can volunteer. And then I said, I don't want to volunteer for any of that, thank you.
Right.
And then it came down to, well, you got to pick one. And I just didn't want to do it. I mean, so I decided to quit, and I wanted to go back to trading. So I thought at the time, all this computer engineering and everything was a waste of time.
Right.
But when I got into trading, I could write a program to actually do this, and so that's how I kind of ended up developing really the first artificial intelligence system. They still don't have anything remotely close to it, but then I basically saw how things were really happening. I mean,
Well, just right there, your idea of building a computer that could help with trading was you thought if we could input all of the information for like on currencies and go back with all the knowledge we have and input all of the gains and drops that have happened over maybe a century if the information was there, that through that history the computer could learn what was about the
same
past
patterns.
Okay, pick out patterns.
What I would say is that what I've understood, also being an advocate of history and interested in that, is that history does repeat mainly because the passions of man never change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can go into Roman history and it was still the same things, credit crises and things of this nature. And I mean, there were major like earthquakes in Turkey. So Emperor, Tiberius, created a welfare program to help bail it out. So it's always the same thing. It's never, I mean, the names change or whatever, but
Yeah.
I would say what I've learned over the years is that if you put, I don't care who it is, it's like an animal, you corner it and it will defend itself.
Right.
So we are the same way. There is definitely a herd instinct. And the way markets really function, because they've launched all sorts of investigations every time there's a crash, they just don't understand it.
Yeah.
It's not that somebody comes in and is some huge short player and forces the market down. They've never been able to find such a person since every investigation since 1907.
Okay.
All right. What it is that everybody that has ever thought of buying is now in. And this latest news, whatever, causes some to take profit. And then what happens is that you get a market that's extremely lopsided, and then you try to sell and there's no bid. So then the market will come down like crashing 1,000 points and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And when I was doing a lecture in Tokyo, I met I would say the guy that actually bought the high in '89. He snuck in because it was an institutional thing, but he bribed his way in.
Okay.
And he apologized. He said, "I just had to talk to you." And I said, what's so compelling here? And he had bought $50 million the very day of the high of the stock market.
Okay.
But what I found interesting, he was in his 60s and he had never invested in stocks his entire life. So I said, "What made you do that?" And he said the brokers called him every year for 7 years and say every January the market goes up 5%. And it did. So he bought the last day of December 1989, and that was the high. So when you sucker in the very last possible person,
Yeah.
there's nobody else to
So
buy.
you lost a ton.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But you then run out of the energy of people coming in to buy more. Everybody's bought, and they're waiting for it to go up, but it doesn't go up because you ran out of people buying.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, it just turns, and that's what a crash is really about. And unless you're a trader, you don't see it.
Right.
The academics tend to look at things theoretically back and forth, and you have to have a trading experience to really see it. I mean, you pick up the phone and like the '87 crash, what made it, because I got pulled into the Brady Commission on that, and what really made it interesting was that the theory was, computer trading, and that's what caused it, and it wasn't. And they went and they actually investigated all the big funds, and then, why did you sell? Because there was no news. And they called the broker and they go, "What the heck is going on?" And I don't know. So what happens is the lack of news is even worse.
Okay.
If you're a professional fund manager and the Fed raised interest rates, okay, they've done that plenty of times. There'll be a knee-jerk reaction. You don't panic. When you pick up the phone, you say, "What's going on?" And the guy says, "I have no idea." Now you don't know, did Russia just invade Europe? The rumors get crazy.
Yeah.
So they just sold, and they said, "Well, I don't know, it's down, 1,000 points. Maybe it's going to go down another 1,000 tomorrow. I don't know."
Right.
So to be prudent, you sell.
Right.
You get out because you don't know what's going on, and that's what really was the '87 crash, because it was prompted by basically forming the G5 in 1985, and then these politicians stand up and to affect the trade deficit. We're going to lower the value of the dollar by 40%. I warned them. I said, "You're going to create a crash." "Oh, why?" I mean, you just sold a third of the national debt to the Japanese.
Right.
Now you're saying you're going to lower the value by 40%? You don't think they're going to sell? Why would they? Because, this is the problem we have with governments. The people that are actually there making these decisions have no experience whatsoever. And so the '87 crash, my biggest accomplishment, if you look at the Brady Commission report, the government will never blame itself.
Right.
At the end of the report, it says, "We think foreign exchange had something to do with it," and that's it.
Wow.
But it's the creating the G5, the Plaza Accord, and standing up and saying we're going to lower the value of the dollar by 40%. Yes, okay, fine. The dollar will be cheaper, so you'll be able to export more, but also all the assets you just sold to somebody.
Right.
They really don't understand the economy.
It's one of the things that I've discovered, because I talked to a lot of politicians, and the first realization I had was we grow up thinking that they're these super brilliant people or something, like they were like born as politicians. And when you sit and talk to them, you realize this guy's just an old coal miner that got into politics, or a dentist, or even a mailman. Like, these are just regular people that decide to get in politics and then elevate themselves up. But that's like their education level was there. I mean, they don't. So what you're saying is there's really very few people in our government that actually were stockbrokers or have any understanding of how money moves and flows, or,
Yeah, I'm very, very. I don't think I've met any. I mean, the only one I would say was probably the most intelligent that I ever met was Margaret Thatcher.
Okay.
She was very good. She understood history, I think, which is what made her really different. But most of these other people, I don't know, maybe that they just want to be loved, so they want to run for politics or something,
Yeah.
but they have nothing really to offer. So, I mean, you look at the COVID thing. I mean, a lot of them are imposing things only because somebody else did.
Right.
So it's kind of like a Me Too type thing. It's like, well, I don't know, they did it, so it must be, it must be okay. And they're putting all these draconian, lockdowns and stuff like this, and the economy goes down, and oh, gee, people lost jobs. I didn't realize that.
Right.
It's really quite pathetic.
All right. So before I want to get into COVID, but just to sort of sum up, people want to watch the documentary, The Forecast, so they can get into it. But you build this computer that becomes really good at analyzing all the data that's being put in and starting to predict market crashes, futures, economies, really, right? What things are going to do. What was the sort of the moment where the computer surprised you?
I would say early 80s, it came out with a forecast that the British pound was going to drop from 240 to par, and that the British economy would flip and align with the United States. And this can't be correct. And I thought this is completely nuts. And it happened. So I developed a query so I could say, how are you coming up with this? And basically it picked up the North Sea oil. So suddenly Britain was becoming an energy exporter versus Europe wasn't. And then when you begin to see it, you say, oh, okay, fine, I can understand this.
So the computer was finding things that the normal person wouldn't be paying attention to, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, if you sat there diligently and you correlated absolutely everything,
Right.
You'd find it, perhaps. But I mean, the computer was just doing it without, any passion.
Right.
We were advising the Universal Bank of Lebanon, and they found somebody with a ledger had written down all the Lebanese pound every day, and they asked us to do a model. I said, sure. I put it in, and it came out, and it said, in 8 days, your country's going to collapse. And I thought the computer's got to be wrong. I said, look, I don't know what. Something's wrong with the data. And they very calmly said to me, okay, fine, well, what currency do you think would be best? I said, I just said your country's going to fall apart.
So it said in 8 days. I mean, all based on some ledgers found which had a history of that currency.
That's when the Lebanese war began.
8 days later.
And I began to realize, how does this computer do this? Because we had another client in Saudi Arabia, and who was big into shipping. And he calls me up on the phone. He says, what do you think gold's going to do tomorrow? Iran's going to start, attacking shipping in the Gulf. I said, you tell me a war's going to start tomorrow? Yeah. And that was the Iran-Iraq war.
Right.
And then I began to realize that people have knowledge that something's going to happen or whatever. Maybe the guys in the bank saw what was developing and they knew a war, were tipped off, we're going to start a civil war or something.
Yeah.
But somebody seems to know. And that begins to move the capital.
Okay.
So, for example, if China was really going to invade the United States, you would pick it up, a computer would pick it up because they sold all the U.S. bonds.
So it'll see the money being withdrawn out of the United States by that.
Yeah,
that
so
nation.
people respond in advance, and that picks it up. And so, I mean, even with 9/11, they started realizing this really from our model and started looking at who was buying puts on airlines in advance and stuff like this. I mean, if you know something's going to happen, then you basically do that. And a lot of the terrorists were doing.
So your computer predicted 9/11?
It right to the day.
Really? So does that mean that 9/11 was planned? I mean, or is it just a natural cycle? It's all accidental, but somehow the computer saw it?
I don't know. These things take place on cyclical turning points. Perhaps it's pressure that builds up in advance that causes it to happen. But I mean, the computer picks it up mainly from a capital flow perspective. Why is it always fairly consistent? I think that, for example, right now, every action a government takes has an equal and opposite reaction. So what they've done on anything, like the G5 and manipulating the currency, then they create the 87 crash.
Right.
The 87 crash comes and that sets in motion some, each thing is like a domino, it just falls over. So the ramifications, even from what they've done with COVID and things of this nature, have seriously disrupted the underlying confidence in government.
All right, very quickly, just what would be some of the big predictions the computer's made over the course of its involvement?
Well, besides 9/11, 87, it picked Britain. It predicted Trump would win, or predicted that Brexit would win. And these things happen because of the economics.
Right.
It wasn't saying Donald Trump is better than this guy. He was given an opportunity because the economy was moving in such a direction. So I went down to Washington after he won, and they like going, "Oh, it's a fluke." I said, "No, you don't understand. They're voting against you. It's not that Donald Trump was this knight on shining armor.
Right.
It was that they're voting against you. He was a non-politician, and they're fed up with what you guys are doing." So it could have been anybody. Donald Trump happened to be the guy there at the right time.
Got it.
That's really what goes on.
So I've had several scientists and doctors. Mostly what we cover on the Highwire is health, and scientists that make a discovery that is going to change how we see things, and they end up, the FBI gets involved, and they end up, and so I sort of have this instinct that when people are arrested by the government, and it tends to make me want to look at that story, you end up finding yourself in a similar position. What was the prediction by your computer model that ended up really getting you sort of in the hot water, as you say?
I would say that was 1998.
Okay.
I did a conference in London at the time, and a guy from the London Financial Times stuck in. I didn't know he was there.
Okay.
And the computer's tracking capital flows. So we saw like 100 billion going into Russia, but we saw 150 billion coming out.
Okay.
So I stood up and I said, "Look, I give Russia about 30 days. That's it, and it's going to crash." And so he then goes out and puts it on the front page of the London. Armstrong says Russia's going to crash. We've got this country running around with all these nukes and stuff like that, and it crashes, and that ends up being the long-term capital management. So then they blame me because it's in there. All right, but that's when the CIA basically came and said at that point, they realized the computer could project the rise and fall of countries. And my conflict with them was that they wanted me to go down to Washington to build this for them. I said, "Look, it took me 16, 17 years to do this.
Right.
All right, I'm not going to go down and work in some bunker for you." I said, "We'll run whatever study you want, we'll run it." And very arrogantly, they basically said, "No, we have to own it." And I said, "Sorry, I'm not doing that."
Right.
And I think from their perspective, they didn't want other countries seeing the same forecast.
They wanted the leg up.
Yeah, and that's, so I just said no. But so they create this contempt, and civil contempt maximum, according to the statutes, 18 months.
Right.
But they just kept rolling it. And actually, on the Supreme Court side of my war, she was in the Second Circuit at the time, and she had written an appeal decision. She dissented, and she says, "This guy's entitled to due process of law." So that probably got me into the Supreme Court.
Okay.
Now, I would say what the forecaster didn't actually say, why did they finally release me? I got into the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ordered them to explain what the heck's going on. And so at that point, I'm released, and they go back to the Supreme
Now, how long
Court.
had you been in jail at that point?
7 years.
7 years?
This is the problem with our legal system, that the judges are all just do whatever the prosecutors tell them. There is no justice in this world. It's all fake. And
Now, you were being accused of a $3 billion
yeah,
Ponzi scheme, which they were never able to prove. And so basically, Sotomayor says, show me the evidence of this. And they just basically open the doors to your jail cell and say, he's out.
yeah, I mean, effectively, I think the problem is these prosecutors are all want to become the next president if they get a big famous case.
Okay.
So the bank says, oh, $1 billion is missing. We have no idea where it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a normal person, okay, how does $1 billion get out of a bank and they don't know? I mean, there had to be a wire, there had to be a check, did I bust in with a tank and take it out of the vault or something?
Right.
And I even said to them, I said, the bank stole the money, all right? And they go, well, we believe the bank. And then I think it took them maybe 6 months to figure out the bank lied.
Right.
I said, how do you get it out of there? What are you people, morons or what?
Right.
So the bank, I told my clients, I said, look, if you don't get over here and sue this bank, you're never going to see a dime because they're going to protect the bank.
Okay.
So the clients did what I told them to do. They came over, and the lead counsel came in to see me, and he says, I'm terribly sorry. It looks like you're collateral damage. I said, yes, I know. And we agreed to cooperate. And then the government went and got a lifetime gag order on me to prevent me from helping my clients against the bank.
Wow.
So the bank ended up having to plead guilty. And so the bankers always get these deals. And this is why people don't understand why banks never go to prison. If they charge the CEO, what are they going to get in a fine? 20 million, 50 million, maybe, if the guy's really rich.
Yeah.
If they charge the bank made $1 billion, well, give us 20%. So they charge the bank. Nobody ever goes to jail. The shareholders end up paying.
Right.
And they get these big fines. Oh, we fined, HSBC $300 million for money laundering.
Right.
But nobody goes to jail.
Right.
The case that's in the forecaster was Bank of New York.
Yeah.
Here you have $7 billion money laundering, supposed to be the biggest money laundering in history. And what happens? The two people in the bank get 6 months house arrest. I mean, that's it.
Now, there's a weird relationship between governments, and especially the government of the United States, and banks, in that you sort of talk about the selling of American debt, which sort of gives them a conflict of interest when it comes to busting these banks. Can you explain that to me?
When it actually goes back to the Civil War, when the U.S. had no national debt before the Civil War. So when they needed to borrow money, they went to Jay Cook, who was a real good marketer. He was selling bonds, and he had a network built up, and they said, we need to raise money. And so he began to sell bonds for the government. So that's kind of, once that was done, what happened after that is that the government always went to the bankers to sell their debt. So we call them primary dealers.
Okay.
So the Treasury didn't sell the debt itself. You wanted to buy a Treasury bond, you had to go to a bank to get it. So every time they would blow up the economy, nobody would ever go to prison because they would say, look, you put us away, and who's going to sell your debt?
Right.
So it was definitely a conflict of interest. So you get these things where they say, okay, fine, well, you made $2 billion on this, give us $400 million. And, oh, we charged HSBC, and we got a big fine. And it's all, a dog and pony show.
All right, let's get to the big dog and pony show we're in now. People, if they want to get into, it's a great documentary. It's sort of on all that you got involved with, the issue of being in prison. But you're out now. When did you get out officially?
2011.
2011. Okay. So this pandemic hits. You're a financial guy. I saw it coming, was predicting to my audience, because I, in some ways, was watching the money. I was saying the pharmaceutical industry is putting more money into our government than any other industry there is. It's outspending oil and gas 2 to 1. It's the #1 financer of our government, putting people in positions of power. And I was saying to audiences, we fight wars in the Middle East for the amount of money oil and gas is pushing into our government. What do you think pharma's going to get? It seemed to me clear that they wanted ownership in some way of every human body there was. And I was, looking and seeing that they're funding other governments all around the world. And so I had predicted there's going to be a pandemic. I believe there's going to be a pandemic. I was saying this to audiences that will scare, they need everyone. People thought that, well, they're just trying to change the laws to make sure that that last 3 to 5% of unvaccinated kids is vaccinated. So there's no way, there's no money in that. It has to be that they want the adult vaccine program. They want everybody lining up for to become this human ATM machine. This is what I was saying to the audience is there has to be a pandemic to scare us into that.
That's where this is going, folks. This is going to you not being able to get on a plane, not being able to work. They want every human being on the planet vaccinated.
So that's what I was warning about. So for me, the moment the pandemic hits and we have the show, The Highwire, this was something we were sort of expecting. I thought it was going to be Ebola or something more deadly than a bad cold. But from your perspective, not, you didn't spend like this. We were talking just the other night, which is why you're here. We had dinner, but I was very aware of everything in science around vaccines, and that's how I made the prediction. How for you did this affect? What were the financial things that were going on, and what did you think as soon as this pandemic started?
It really began in August 2019.
Okay.
The U.S. banks would no longer participate in what's called the repo market. Another bank needs some money, so they post some collateral for the 24-hour market. Suddenly, the U.S. banks wouldn't touch anything to do with Europe.
Okay.
So the Federal Reserve had to step in, and that was August of 2019. It was clear at that point in time that everything was starting to change in the capital flows, and something serious was developing in Europe. The very next month is when Bill Gates bought his stake in the European biotech company. By December, there are rumors running around that a virus is coming.
December
of 2019.
In your world, rumors are running there's a virus coming.
Yes. By January, I know that even Klaus Schwab had told people that he knew a virus was coming.
Okay.
And I was told by reliable sources that besides Bill Gates starting to sell stock off in December of 19, that the World Economic Forum Schwab had sold all his stuff out, including stocks and bonds. Now, you wouldn't sell bonds unless you thought the governments are going to go down. Usually, it's what we call a flight to quality. If you sell the stocks, you buy the bonds.
Okay.
Back and forth. But when you start selling both, something's wrong.
Okay.
So that was coming up. So the computer projected we were going to have what ended up being the COVID crash.
Okay.
And I think what you're dealing with is that Schwab had a hand in creating Europe, and people don't understand how bad Europe is. And the object is really to get rid of democracy.
Okay.
In Europe, to make people think they still have some sort of a right, you get to vote for an MP for Parliament. But Parliament has no power to write laws or overrule the Commission. The Commission doesn't stand for election. The head of the EU also is not elected. They're appointed by the other heads of state. So you have a political system there that has pretended to be a democracy, but has nothing to do with anything. So they've successfully eliminated the power of the people to actually overthrow the government at the polls. And that's what they would love to do here. At that point in time, Schwab is, some people think that he's just been a front man, and he's not. He's one of the major brains behind this thing. He is convinced that eliminating democracy and equality is, of course, not for him, but that's the answer. And this whole Marxist idea was that you can eliminate depressions and things of this nature if the government controlled everything. But the government's corrupt.
Right.
You know, so you get people paying them one way or
We had
another.
angels. We had angels in government, and somehow, like,
Yeah,
you know,
it's,
they always cared about humanity. So, um, I mean, so talking about Schwab and this sort of, so one of the things that when you and I were talking, I was saying that I always get the question of, is it evil? Is it the reducing population with the vaccine program, all of this? And my experience is, for the most part, that these people involved really believe in this product. They really believe in it. You know, they believe that someday they'll be able to vaccinate for every virus and every bacteria on the planet. It's crazy. To me, it's crazy. Who would want to even get that many injections or whatever? But they don't believe in God. They have a fear of death, and their job on this planet is to right the wrongs of humanity and make sure that we are never prone to disease ever. And they know they have a journey to get there, but they really believe someday there is this, you know, utopia that they've built. And I think that that is evil in a way. For me, you know, evil is that when you start thinking you're God or there's a lack of God, then you sort of, whether it's benevolent, they think they're benevolent. They think, the people I've met think what they're doing is right. Is Klaus Schwab different, or is he similar to that? Is he an evil person setting out to destroy the world?
I don't think so. Not in his mind. I mean, one, he does think that they can create organs and things of this nature. And my concern is that a lot of the people that are involved in this are 80 years old. And are they
Right.
doing it?
They're dreaming of a computer that can make a new heart for them because they're going to need it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems very strange to me. I mean, even Fauci's like 80.
Yeah.
You know, why is he still there?
Right.
You know, obviously it's somebody like power, because, I mean, he's now the highest paid person because he's been there so long. He gets more
Right.
than the President of the United States.
Yes.
But why are you still there? You know, and the only thing that would entice somebody is power. And so is it delusional, self-delusion? Perhaps. I'm not so sure that they want, I think there is an effort to depopulate the world. And that comes more from the Gates side. But
And is Gates a major player, or is he just a front man for something we're not seeing? Because I keep feeling like this is a guy that, if there's you know, we all hear about the Illuminati and this room full of people that, you know, we never see, that are making the decisions for the world. But it sure seems to me that Bill Gates, very intelligently, you know, he's being accused of running a monopoly, and so all of a sudden he sort of comes out of that whole situation and decides to get into NGOs and nonprofits and starts investing into multiple sectors, but the biggest one, health. I mean, he is all over health. He's funding WHO. He's like, you know, and vaccine programs and tracking systems, and so it seems to me he's holding a lot of what this future, for guys like Klaus Schwab, what they're going to need: the technologies to track people, the drugs and the vaccines to keep them alive or manipulate their health or make them live forever or shorten their lives or cull the herd, as you would. So it seems to me Bill Gates must be, if there is that room, he's certainly, though, you know, he's not invisible, we see him, is he a major player in this now?
oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah?
The three major players are Soros, Gates, and Schwab.
Okay.
But they each bring something different to the table. Schwab began his whole World Economic Forum like, you attend here and you'll get to meet a head of state and maybe you can get some influence, you know. So he was selling that. And that's how the World Economic Forum grew,
Okay.
for political contacts. But Schwab is more on the economic side. He really believes in this Marxist, you know, panacea, so to speak. Soros is, with his open society, believes in this one world government. And the EU, I mean, I put on a video on our site of the former president of France, Holland. He stands up and he's sitting next to Merkel in the parliament. And he actually says the main purpose of the EU was that if we all get together, then we create one government and we'll end war. This is their idea. And
Soros pushes power in the UN, right? In order,
yes, his idea is the UN would then become the dominant control of the world. These are very
what's the advantage
bizarre.
to him? Like, what? Why does that? Why? I mean, there must be personal advantage to that thought system.
I don't know if he seems to have been really indoctrinated into this idea from the London School of Economics, which is extremely left.
Okay.
Why he believes it, I don't know, but he does. Maybe because he grew up as basically a Jew, pretending he was a Christian. I don't know.
Okay.
Whatever set him in motion on that.
All right.
Gates, his father was, the head of Planned Parenthood, which was basically set up in minority areas to reduce the population. So I think that's his overall idea. In programming side, I mean, I knew, the way Gates operated. He was always interested really in monopolies. And if you came out, like there was a company, Netscape, and that's what ended up bringing down, Gates out of Microsoft. But they created the internet browser. And he would then create something, put it in Windows for free to basically put them out of business. It was always this to create this monopoly. So when the feds went after Microsoft, the deal was they didn't break Microsoft up provided he left. The same deal was done with AIG and over the mortgage debt stuff. And so Bill Gates had to resign from being the hands-on at Microsoft. But when he walked into health, he's exactly the same thing. Control absolutely every agency, everything, period. And that just gives me concern from the standpoint that I know his character is to monopolize things,
right?
To control. Klaus Schwab kind of does the same thing.
Okay.
Schwab set up a youth leaders group, and he's training people to be future heads of state. I mean, the head of state of New Zealand is a graduate from his. I mean, there's a lot of people that you'd be very surprised are graduates from Klaus Schwab's brainwashing operation, the way I see it. But Schwab had the influence, the ability to bring in world leaders, which Gates and Soros didn't have.
Okay.
So they're attracted to him, and they bring different pieces to the table. So it was Gates that comes in with the climate change and all this other kind of nonsense that climate's always changed. I mean, there's been ice ages, but how did we get out of an ice age if there wasn't, soccer moms driving around SUVs, But I mean, there are cycles to absolutely everything. We have seasonal cycles. That's part of nature.
Okay. So we are hearing in Klaus Schwab, I've talked about him on our show. You've got the World Economic Forum. What was really scary to me was the moment I, saw this slogan, Build Back Better, coming from this overall sort of idea, dream of the Great Reset. And then the Great Reset, we're going to take this opportunity of this pandemic, which now you're saying was predicted, like they somehow knew this virus was coming, and that there was going to be this upheaval. The Great Reset, he's saying, let's use this as an opportunity to rebuild the world. We're going to build back better. And then I saw Joe Biden giving a speech, one of the few where he came out of his basement to see the world when he was running for president. And on his podium, it said, build back better.
Exactly.
And I thought, this is terrifying. This is the first time I know of where I'm visually watching and have confirmation that a theme or an idea that wasn't born in the United States of America is being presented by a man running for the president of the United States. I found that to be very, very scary. I know that this is a slogan coming from Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab is saying things like, no one will own anything, everyone will rent, and America will not be a superpower in the future. You know, that this power is going to be consolidated somewhere else. And here I have a man running for president that is quoting, you know, I know that these guys are visiting Klaus Schwab, but now he's using his slogans. And this Build Back Better slogan became an American financial slogan, even though, as you pointed out, head of New Zealand's using it. Up in Canada, you know, all over the world, they're all using this slogan being written by Klaus Schwab or his people inside of there, it seems. What is this really all about? The Great Reset. Is it, why now? Like, what is it that needs to be reset? Is there something that's about to happen or is going on that we don't know?
Yes, from the economic side, you go back to the 1930s when Keynesian economics was launched. The idea was that you could raise interest rates to stop us from borrowing and lower interest rates to make us borrow. At least it made sense back then because we were the major, you know, player in the economy.
Okay.
But over time, what's happened is the politicians distorted Keynesian economics. Keynes also said you can stimulate the economy by lowering taxes, which they don't want to do.
Right.
So they used Keynes as the excuse from there on out to run deficits every year. So ever since World War II, now the governments are the biggest borrower and debtor in the system. The real crisis started in 2014.
Okay.
When the ECB lowered interest rates to negative.
And ECB stands for?
European Central Bank.
Okay.
Back then, I mean, I was warning us, don't do this. You're going to wipe out your bond markets. And I think I did another documentary probably 4 years ago, and I warned that, you know, you're going to just, you know, Europe is destroying its bond market, period. So what's happened is, it's really like we have Dumb and Dumber running countries.
Okay.
You mandate to a pension fund that to be conservative, you have to have government debt.
Okay.
Not private. Then you lower interest rates to negative. And they don't even put two and two together that within a few years you're going to make all the pension funds insolvent.
Okay.
So in Europe, they're basically all broke.
The pension funds were invested in bonds because that's what they were sort of
which they
forced
took
to
negative.
do. Then they take them negative.
And they've wiped out the pension funds.
Okay.
So that's where it comes back, this guaranteed basic income, this idea, because they know they've wiped out people's pensions and stuff like this. So how are we going to get out of that?
Right.
So this whole thing is about when Schwab comes out and says, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. It's a front.
Okay.
All right. It's people think, oh, they're going to take our property. They don't really. It's to pretend that they are doing this for you. You're going to be eliminated. Your mortgage payments, your car payments, they'll be all gone. Student loans. Sounds good. But basically it's a front because it's the way government defaults.
Okay.
But they can't default. If they default, and what would happen is they wipe out everybody's savings, the pension funds, etc., which is what happened in the Great Depression.
Okay.
I suggest reading, it's online, Herbert Hoover's memoirs, 1931. From all the history books, they hid the fact that governments defaulted, permanently defaulted on their debt, and that's what made the Great Depression so bad. So we're back at that point.
Governments are about to default.
Yeah. Europe is completely gone. That's it. I've spoken to bankers in New York. That's what the repo crisis is about. And bankers in New York will no longer even accept European government debt as collateral for a loan.
Wow.
I mean, that's how bad this has gotten.
So what does that mean for Europe in the what's about to happen?
That's
is it
what
happening?
this Great Reset's about.
Okay.
Schwab has sold the idea that the only way you're going to come out of this is we need more authoritarian forms so you retain power. I've argued on the opposite side of the table from him is that we can eliminate the debts by creating coupons and then swapping them to do a debt to equity swap. So then you would take these coupons and you could only invest it.
So is that a coupon given to citizens or given to people?
Okay. If you got a $1,000 bond, you get a coupon. Then you could take it to Klaus Schwab or whatever and say, okay, fine, it's good to buy equities.
Okay.
So small companies would fund, have suddenly the funding would be there for them to actually grow. Most small businesses, 70% of them are turned down for loans.
Right.
So I mean, you could grow the economy tremendously if you stop competing against them. But why
So the
should
government's competing against the
absolutely?
people.
I'm a banker and say, well, why should I lend you money when I can get AAA from the government and I know I don't lose anything?
Right.
So you got to give me something more, and I have to have confidence in you that you're not going to go broke. So the government's competing with the private sector, and that's why the economic growth has been declining. So the bigger they get, the more they consume. It's kind of like you make $100,000 or $1 million a year, and that's fine. But now you say, well, let me get a maid to do this, then I'll get another one to do that. They don't bring more to your income. They consume it.
Right.
So next thing you know, okay, fine, I was making $1 million, but I got a staff now. I'm paying $500,000 to. So are you making $1 million or $500,000?
Right.
And that's the problem with government. Government doesn't create jobs. I mean, anything that it creates consumes what somebody else produces. It doesn't produce income. So the bigger a government gets, the slower the economic growth. It's simple as that. I mean, you can just take this.
How bad is this about to get? I mean, is America in the same position as Europe, or are we in we're in a better place?
We're in a better place because we never went negative. And the Federal Reserve is independent. So the Fed is raising interest rates, which is basically a declaration of war against Europe. The ECB is different. All central banks are not the same. So the ECB would have to go back to Parliament to ask for more money to create more and more and more. And then the problem with that is that in Europe, you have to have everybody consent. So it's kind of like, getting a unanimous bill through Congress. I mean,
it's never going to happen.
Not going to happen. So the ECB is in a much different position. So the ECB can actually go bust. If they all disagree on funding it, then it's actually not there. Whereas the Fed is independent. The Fed, yes, can create money. It has the ability to create elastic money. So it can increase the money supply or decrease it. It doesn't go back to Congress to say, gee, can we do this?
How is Europe going to get out of this?
This is what Schwab has sold to them. The only way out of this is to basically do his great reset. And that you'll
get everybody used to the fact that they just lost everything they own,
but sell it in a different way. It's kind of like life insurance. I mean, if you buy accident insurance, fire insurance, all these things, but when it comes to yourself, do you buy death insurance?
No,
they can't sell death, so they call it life. And you go, oh yeah, I got $5 million worth of life. How much do you have? But they said if it's death insurance, they couldn't sell it because people go, well, I'm not ready to die yet. Okay, so maybe it's bad luck if I buy it. So they just switched the name.
Interesting.
And it's a marketing ploy, and that's what they've done with this. So I say, oh, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. It's because they're going to default. And they can't default unless they fool you to make it think that they're doing this for you.
Now, if Europe defaults and just gets obliterated, I mean, do we get pulled into that sinkhole?
That's why they had to get rid of Trump, because Trump was standing in against this climate change. And what you have to understand about the climate change is that that's the agenda of the UN. The UN says no single country can defeat climate change, as if we could really do anything anyhow. But
right.
So their argument is everybody has to be subservient to the UN, and the UN will make the rules and regulations. And that's where Schwab's little video, the U.S. will no longer be a superpower. Our arsenals will be handed to the UN, and UN will become the one world government, which is Soros's dream.
So global warming is sort of the headline by which we try to convince the world to all sink the power into a singular space, this being the UN, and create that one world power. So that's the sales pitch.
Yes, I mean, look, it's you can go back and there's a front page of Newsweek from 1970. All the scientists said, "Oh no, we're going into an ice age."
Right.
You know, and then they flip it. All right. I mean, they've never been correct about any of this stuff. And the main reason is, unfortunately, the way most of these analytical ideas progress. It's let's say it's 40 degrees this year, 45 next year, 50 degrees. So then they go, oh, it's warming. And then they take it on a linear projection and say, oh, by the year 2060, we'll all be burning alive. Things don't work that way. That's like saying, okay, fine. Well, the Dow went up 1,000 this year. The next year, it's always going to go up 1,000. That doesn't happen. But this is how they come up with these projections that are really nonsense. Global warming. Oh, we're all going to just go back. I mean, warming periods. It was Rome basically expanded because it got warm, and as soon as it gets cold, civilizations collapse. Mainly because people can't they can't grow food and things of this nature. That's when disease comes, the Black Plague and things of this nature. Mainly because people are malnourished.
Right.
I mean, you can even find letters of John Adams talking in the in the Revolutionary War that the ground was frozen 2 feet deep. It was so cold we couldn't grow any food. So global cooling is far worse for civilization than warming.
So now, as we sit, one of the big probably conversations going on in this pandemic, I don't know on which side, but it feels like a lot of people are thinking, is there a civil war coming? And, the pressure is being let off. As we're speaking right now, COVID looks like maybe this Omicron is going to sweep through and sort of wipe out the need for vaccine, certainly show to the world that vaccine was useless. But there's this real divide in this nation now. So if you're asked, do you think we're on the verge of a civil war? What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I mean, the damage that's been caused with this pandemic is they have deliberately divided people. I mean, even the race issues they used. And so everything they could do to separate people. The Nazis, that's how they gained power. Those, they say you're it's like the old prisoner's, dilemma. He says you did it. Oh, no, he did it.
Right.
You separate people. And so they've been, over the years, they've used religion, they've used race, they've used, everything. This time they're also using vaxxed versus unvaxxed and things of this nature. But you have seriously disrupted civilization. What makes civilization function is that we all come together and everybody benefits. And why countries fall is that when it suddenly begins to flip and, now the government sees it has power, well, I'll exploit this group for you. You're starting to divide it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have people that leave. We have staff in Germany that are fleeing to Dubai because now the definition of being vaccinated is a booster every 3 months, and your children must be vaccinated, and it's insane, completely insane.
So as that happens, as we have people fleeing to certain areas where there's more freedom, fleeing from places where they feel oppressed, then is that sort of throws things out of balance? I mean, it makes me think of sort of the North and the South,
right?
Oh,
yes.
I mean, when we think the North and South in the original Civil War, and I've been saying this, I mean, is that, and here's sort of my prediction, and to see if I'm anywhere near from where I'm coming from. What I've been saying is, I think very similar to the North and the South, though slavery was a part of that. It was really about finance and business, and there seemed to be this disadvantage to the way business was being done in the South compared to the North, and so that sort of lack of balance created a real conflict and war. And I feel like here we have freedoms now landing in the red states, tend to be the South again in an odd way, but Texas has been open. We haven't been masked. We've been free. There's our governor said, I'm not going to allow a forced vaccine mandate, and so just financially, people are coming to Texas. I mean, we just read this week that there are no U-Hauls in California because they've all come to Texas. Like everyone's moving to Texas. People leaving New York, going to Florida, Texas, Florida and Texas. Florida's booming. Texas economy's booming. If you're doing a convention, we're going to do the convention. You're not going to go to California anymore, to the beaches of California for your convention. You're going to go to the beaches of Texas or Florida and have your convention. So all the money, it seems to me, is going to start pouring into what you could call the free states. And it's leaving, sort of the oppressed states. And then I would imagine at some point we could see travel bans if they continue to use disease as a reasoning, where you can't leave a red state and go into a blue state. I mean, these are all the type of spaces, but that divide, there's got to be, I think there's going to be a growing rage as the economies of those, I hate to say it politically, but right now it seems to be politically divided, blue and red, or, Democrat, Republicans. But as they starve out and sort of lose the people, they lose the business, and it all moves, then there's a need for someone to right that ship. And isn't that where we end up in war?
The Civil War, yes, there was slavery, but the real bottom line was states' rights. And what most people don't realize in this country, when they voted on the Constitution, it was not unanimous. Only 39 out of 70 voted for it. Like Virginia, Patrick Henry, no, because there was no Bill of Rights. So it was not, there's always been this contention from the beginning of this country about states' rights versus federal.
Huge conversation just this last, over the Supreme Court. Does Joe Biden have the right to force the vaccine through OSHA? States' rights versus federal rights. Sotomayor saying, why doesn't the federal government have this, power? But obviously the conservative judges came out in, to the states' rights, saying this is not something.
That's the way the Constitution is.
Right.
I mean, it's also why the United States has done better than Europe. Macron can shut down all of France. Biden can't shut down all the United States.
Right.
I mean, I live in Florida, and I can tell you the traffic has doubled.
Yeah.
But I was walking the beach, and there was a guy there, and his two teenage sons were surfing. And he says, "Oh, are you from Florida?" I said, "Well, I moved here about 6 years ago." And he said he just moved down because his sons were, becoming suicidal. And I think and twice I met people like that I think maybe for the boys it's worse because they think that, if they were into sports, they're going to become the next, NBA player or quarterback or whatever. And whereas more on the academic side, they could maybe do their homework from school in isolation or virtual, but, you don't get that on the sports side. So, I bumped into two people that moved to Florida simply because of their children. They couldn't go play sports or anything else. We had our conferences in Orlando. I couldn't have held them anywhere else in the country.
Right.
Maybe in Texas, but this is it. But the other part of this is that these politicians never accept responsibility. So the more they have put in these lockdowns and things of this nature, then they realize that they screwed themselves in the sense that their revenues went down, sales tax and things of this nature. So then what do they do? Oh, well, we need to raise taxes more to compensate for what we lost. Instead of, does it ever dawn on you to maybe reduce the size of government? They don't think that way. Right. So ironically, a lot of Wall Street has been moving to Boca Raton, to Miami. I think Miami is going to basically replace Wall Street. I mean, even Goldman Sachs moved. Oh, we're keeping our headquarters here, but the most profitable division is in Florida. All right. I had a friend who was one of the top investment bankers in New York, and he called me and said, "Gee, you want to go to dinner?" I said, "Oh, you're down here in Florida." We went to dinner, and he says, "Well, no, I just moved here." Right. I said, "You moved here?" He says, "Yeah, we work virtual now, so I moved to Florida." It's interesting.
Has your computer looked at, if there is going to be unrest in the United States of America, when we're going to see that?
Yes. I mean, it looks very grim from probably 24 to 27, I would say. Those in power don't see it. So all they're concerned about is keeping power. So they'll get more authoritarian, more draconian, rather than say you are the problem.
Right.
And that's why I say in Washington there are no mirrors. They never look at themselves. When they investigate a financial crisis, does anybody ever look at, did the government cause this?
So 24 to 27 in the United States of America, your computer model, which has been incredibly
civil unrest rising dramatically. You're seeing the same thing in Europe.
Yeah.
You know, even before the pandemic, I went down to Greece, and when, you know, Germany was against Greece, getting out of the loans and stuff. And you see protests there, and they're walking around in Nazi uniforms. I mean, the memories in Europe go back much further than, I was in Yugoslavia years ago, and they go, oh, well, you know, they killed 600 of us, and they put us, in a mass grave. I said, I thought I missed it in the news. I said, when did this happen? Oh, about 500 years ago. I said, oh yeah, that one.
That one, right.
I was in Bavaria, and they said, oh, it's a holiday today. I said, what's the holiday? Oh, we won the war. I said, which war? Oh, against Prussia.
Right.
So they remember things much longer over there, and part of it, why Europe will fail, is language. What made America great was actually discrimination. Sounds crazy, but whoever was the last off the boat, you didn't get a job unless you spoke English. So when the Italians came, they had to learn English. When everybody came, it was fair, whoever was the last one off the boat.
Right.
Basically. But so then you ask an American, what are you? Oh, well, I'm half Irish, half Italian, whatever. You don't see that in Europe. Very rarely, will a Scot marry somebody from Italy? I mean, they don't speak the same language. So you're not really, you don't see it that often. So that's what keeps Europe actually divided. I mean, if a girl from France brought a German home for dinner, and the father's going to say, you do know what they did to us,
Right.
The memories just go back a long time.
When Klaus Schwab makes this prediction that America will not be a superpower, do you feel that that's an accurate prediction? Or, I mean, whether they're driving that agenda or not, do we see a shift towards China, which is, I think, what we're all concerned about?
Well, China, after 2032, will be the new financial capital of the world.
Okay.
The computer's pretty strong on that. But you have to understand that that's because we are committing suicide ourselves.
Okay.
Dividing the country like this, Biden saying, oh, the military, you have to be vaccinated. And I think it was like 46% were refusing to get vaccinated, and then, oh, you get dishonorably, discharged. This is, what is this? And then you stand up and say, well, U.S. will be there to defend Taiwan. Well, how are you going to do that if you're going to fire half the military?
Right.
It seems like,
defund the police.
It's completely crazy. That is an agenda that's something that's different. It's like to eliminate local police and put in federal police.
Why is that?
There's an old lesson from politics. It's called the Nika Revolt that happened in Byzantine times in the 6th century. The people were revolting against the emperor, and the local police sided with the people.
Okay.
And the emperor was about ready to flee, and his wife said, you have a legion outside that would come in and defend you. And they were not Greek. They were, from Italy. And they came in, and they defended, and they basically slaughtered everybody and killed 40,000 people in the stadium. So that lesson is that if Greeks would not do that to people they knew, but bring in a different army, and they'll do whatever because they don't like the Greeks to begin with.
Right.
So that's why they want defund the police, get rid of the local police.
Because they know each other. They know the people.
Exactly.
It's their neighborhood. It's my brothers
if I
and
live
sisters.
next to you, am I going to shoot you?
Right.
Well, I really have known him. He's been really okay. I'm not going to follow that order. So they'd rather have somebody else come in who doesn't know you. I'm told to shoot you. I follow orders. That's it. That's why. It goes back to
the local police are important to our stability and
Yes.
future in defending ourselves.
Very, very much so.
You know, one of the questions I would have, because I think my audience now, right, we're all, you know, are shocked and fearful that China is going to be a superpower, maybe not the United States of America. We may be on the verge of some sort of civil war, huge, deep unrest. You know, 24, you know, in the next few years, 2024 to 2027. Is your model ever wrong? Or in all the time that you've watched this, certainly, have you ever thought, man, if I could warn people ahead of time and get people to really wake up to what's going on, that they could change their fate, change this destiny?
I
this change
tried.
of it? Yeah?
I tried defeating my own model. I lost every time. Because I think it's a combination of everything, and so you can't just change one simple thing, and it just has to play out its course. That's what I've learned over 40 years in doing this thing. It's never been wrong because history does repeat because of humanity makes the same mistakes over and over again. Rome fell basically from corruption internally, as we're seeing again here. All right, and there was a general that, I forget which one, but he sent a letter out and warned that maybe U.S. could go into civil war by 2024, that the military will split. That's how Rome fell. Okay, the military split. So there were civil wars, this general against that one, etc.
You take sides.
They do. They take sides. So there will be people that will say, okay, fine, no, I think, the South is correct. We should, and they would defend against the North. I mean, there was a joke when I think Biden was talking about putting in restrictions to people going to Florida, and DeSantis came out and said he would call out the National Guard to defend Floridians against the feds. I mean that's how stupid this everything gets.
Yeah.
But
so what do we do? I mean, how do we, I mean, I'm sort of proud of America. We've resisted this vaccine push. Though a lot of us got it. I would say that 40%, more than really almost every first world nation, there's something inside of us that has a rebellious spirit that sort of stood against this. DeSantis, Abbott, Texas, Florida, other Arizona. There's states that really sort of held strong states' rights being argued by 27 attorney generals that pushed back against the Biden administration. So it seems like there's hope. But what do we do? I mean, what do I have to recognize, since there's a computer model I have no control over? I have my world leaders that seem out of our control, grabbing more and more authoritarian power. What do we do as citizens under these circumstances?
Basically, just prepare for being on your own, really. As you know, I mean, I was advising different political agendas in the United States for a long time. So I've worked behind the curtains and seen how it actually works. When Reagan was elected, they actually said at that time they were beside themselves. They don't like people from outside of Washington. That's why they didn't like Trump.
Yeah.
You take Biden and Harris, both from Washington.
Yeah.
They don't want somebody, because it's like you're playing in our sandbox. You don't know how this works down here.
Yeah.
And I used to basically be part of the vetting process for somebody that wanted to run for president. They would send me in. I would talk about the world economy to see. They were told that's what I was there to advise them on, but it was really me also looking at them and saying, is there a light on here? Do they understand it?
Right.
And I get back and they go, what do you think? Think he could handle it? And that was a real vetting process.
Yeah.
Then 99, that changed. And
that changed with
Bush Jr.
Okay.
They told me to go down to Texas, and they said, this one's different. And I said, what's different? And he said, no, you don't have to assess whether he can handle it. He's, we think he's, a little slow.
So they thought he was an idiot.
And so they basically, I said, why would you do that? Because it was completely opposite of everything we were doing before. And they said, well, he's got the name. And ever since then, like Obama attended maybe 60% of his morning briefings, they've always wanted somebody who's just a figurehead. That's it. Let us do what we need to do. So the deep state, so to speak, is really what controls things. So with Bush Jr., I mean, I saw that movie, I forget what it was called, but, you know, that, he picked Cheney. No way.
Yeah.
They picked Cheney and put Cheney in. You're lucky if Bush knew where, you know, Iraq even was. It was all Cheney's deal.
Right.
And that's the way this is going. So they finally, with Trump, they put in his cabinet. He didn't really understand how Washington worked. And he thought, okay, fine, yeah, I'll put in people that have experience to create stability.
Like Bolton in there, these
Everyone
guys.
stabbed him in the back every which way they can.
Fauci, Birx, like all these
Yes.
people.
So that was Trump's biggest mistake, because they didn't like him when he's in here saying that he's going to drain the swamp. Well, the swamp is both sides, you know, not just one side.
Right.
So they didn't like it. John McCain is the one that took the fake dossier from Hillary, and he's the one that gave it to Comey. So it made it look like it was coming from a Republican,
Right.
not political. And even at McCain's funeral, he said, "I don't want Trump speaking there." You know, I mean, the resentment, and hatred is runs very, very deep. You're still fighting Trump, you know, today. All right, and so they have Biden in there, and he'll sign anything they stick in front of him, really. You're lucky if he can read it. You know, it's Kerry who is the main point man for Schwab in the White House.
John Kerry?
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, there's even a YouTube video. Fauci appears in Schwab's videos.
Right.
Oh, the number one problem is equality. Why is he in there? You know, the head of New Zealand's in his. I mean, everybody that he has ties to is in there pushing his agenda, and that includes Fauci.
So what do we do to protect ourselves? If it comes down to states' rights, are we going to? Do you think there's going to be states that sort of divide from the union, or is there?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah.
There'll be separatist unions. You're already seeing a lot of separatist actions, like in Oregon and in California. People saying we don't want to support the other side. They're crazy. When this is why I say we're losing civilization. Civilization is when everybody benefits, not when, okay, now I've got in charge, so I'm going to oppress you because I want it this way. Even the you can look at history when the English Civil War took place and Cromwell came in, and you know the religious right that they were, the Puritans. He outlawed sports because that led to cursing. He outlawed Christmas because you're supposed to be praying. He created people that went around and spied in your house to make sure you weren't celebrating Christmas. So that's why Cromwell and the English said, wait a minute, this is going too far the other way. And they overthrew him and then went back with the king. And
you have a similar thing. If Biden oppressed, like instead of like right where you should be, you know, getting America to come together, work together, he's dividing, he's pressuring. I'm going to force you. I'm going to take away your job. I'm going to force you to lock down. I'm going to force you in a mask. All these things.
He's the perfect guy, because I really question whether he's coherent enough to understand what's going on. But I've seen it. I mean, the judge that I had dementia. You can even Google him, Richard Owens, and he was like, you know, how long are these guys on? He was on the bench from 1970 or something, appointed by Nixon. I would go to court, he would forget who I was. And he'd be like, oh, counselor, you're arguing admirably for your client. And the marshals go, oh, you're the lawyer? I said, no, I'm the defendant. You know, oh, yeah, he's crazy. I mean, but this is what goes on. And Biden's the same way. So I can see it in what he says. And then there's a clip like one guy on CNN got vaccinated. Oh, are you okay? You know, so was that a slip? You know,
right. So just to sort of wrap this up, where should we find our hope?
I really think eventually you will see the United States split. they have created a divide between blue and red, basically, using the vaccines, and it has tapped into this idea of socialism versus, capitalism. And it's been around for a long time, and this is Marxist ideas, and this is why communism fell. I can tell you, because I was also called in by China to help them become capitalistic when they first formed. And I was impressed with the Chinese versus the Russians. The Russians went from communism to an oligarchy. You competed with one of them, and your head was found in the gutter next street. The Chinese were monitoring absolutely everything, but they did not interfere. So I went there. There were 249 varieties of tea that they were tracking. I had no clue there were that many varieties of tea in China.
Right.
But it was fascinating because they were talking about, well, why is this tea selling for $5 here but $1 here? I said, well, where does it come from? Well, here. I said, well, first you have transportation costs. They go, oh, really? And I said, people will pay more for something that's better or for someplace else. Under communism, the reason it fell is this equality. Everybody pays $1, even if it costs $10 to get it there.
Right.
And that's why it was never efficient and why it collapsed. And these ideas of equality, sorry, I mean, a guy that can be a quarterback and can throw a ball better than I can, I mean, you're going to give me the job? Or are you going to give the guy that can really do it?
Is China a communist nation? I mean, is it?
No, it's not communism. It's a more authoritarian type thing. Communism is the government owns everything. It's not communism. Russia's not communism anymore. They moved more to a authoritarian free market type thing, where they control things, yes. But communism, you wouldn't even be allowed to own your house. So, I mean, that's the real definition between socialism and communism. Socialism, you own your house, but they're going to tell you what you can do with it. Communism, they own your house and tell you can't leave until we tell you that you can go to another place.
So then the hope is that there will be states in this divide that hold strong to capitalism and pull through?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, you'll see Europe also divide. This idea of one size fits all, it doesn't work. I mean, throughout history, you have empires rise and they fall, and they rise and they fall. They rise when they benefit everybody. When you start singling out groups, you fall. You need, everybody's got to benefit. If we all don't benefit together, then what's the purpose of being together? You leave. And that's
It's time to come together with everyone that...
Yeah, and they're deliberately dividing the country on race and vaccines and everything they possibly can. And you can Google it. This is a political idea, and Amazon used it. And the papers came out, and they were in a union dispute in Alabama, I think it was. And they created a diversity index for their employees. The more diverse the workforce, then they would never get together to form a union. If you created all whites or all blacks or whatever, they would then band together, and then they demand a union. So all this came out. I mean, this is a political agenda that's been around for a long time, but Amazon was using it for its own employees. And this is what the government is doing. If you divide everybody, then they will never join together and overthrow you. That's the real objective here. But the problem is, in doing that, you also destroy civilization.
I want to really thank you for taking the time. When people want to sort of follow the work that you're doing, the predictions that you're making, what's the best place for them to find that information?
You can go to armstrongeconomics.com. You don't have to register, put in emails or anything. We don't even sell advertising to keep it just as a public service. That's it.
Absolutely incredible. One of the sort of more mind-blowing conversations I've had. I really want to thank you for taking the time. I want to thank you for standing your ground and really, truly representing what it means to be a hero, government, coming after you, end up, you walk out, you're free, you proved to be right, you held on to everything you believed in.
Oh, I just believed in Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death. I'm not going to go any other way.
Amen.
Thanks
Great
a lot.
meeting you. Good talking to you.
Nice meeting you.
All right. Well, obviously, you know, we do these long form interviews full of a lot of information, but I know you have your friends out there that maybe have short attention spans, and that's why we have put together our Get Vaccinated campaign. Here's what that's all about. Folks, it's time for you to get vaccinated. The Highwire is launching a brand new campaign to arm you with the facts in short videos you can share anywhere, featuring the world's leading experts on COVID-19, vaccines, and everything in between.
Natural immunity appears to be robust, complete, and durable.
These are the drop the mic, fully cited facts to help you, the super spreaders of truth, in this real war of misinformation. Share the link, download the short video, and post to your favorite social media platform. All you have to do is go to thehighwire.com/getvaccinated for all of the latest short videos. And make sure to grab your Get Vaccinated merch at thehighwire.com. Click shop for the latest in Highwire gear. We want you armed with the facts online and on the front lines. Get the facts, lose the fear at thehighwire.com.